We usually have some music playing in the background, so I am sorry that we couldn't get that going for you. But just imagine you humming a little song along, bouncing with the beat as we all come in and get settled. Welcome.
Logical purity without materialism is useless.
Okay. But it's an absolute pleasure to have you all.
Welcome.
This is my real life older brother.
As you come in, if you would please go ahead and mute your microphones so that we can hear very well our speakers for the evening. Feel free to use the chat to post any questions that you might have as we go along. Tracy and Adriana, are we ready to get started?
Yes, me too.
Okay, I will turn it over to you. We'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much all for joining us tonight. Adriana will quickly take over.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. Today, we're going to be talking about resisting stereotypes and bias in police encounters. Next slide. So again, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm so excited to just get started into this dialogue, and I hope you guys are just as excited as I am. I want to introduce myself here real quick. My name is Adriana Bumbarger. I attend Lock Haven University. I'm a criminal justice major with a minor in sociology. I joined this project because I have a passion for justice. I think it's really important to stand up for what's right, even when it may be easy to turn a blind eye. And I wanted the opportunity to be involved in this initiative, to contribute to important topics like this, and just learning what I can do to leave a positive impact on my community.
That was so well said, Adriana. Once again, we're so honored to have our panelists here tonight, and thank you to our audience for being here also. My name is Tracy. I was born and raised in Haiti, also in Philadelphia. I am a graduate senior at Kutztown University, earning a minor in psychology and a major in psychology and a minor in professional writing and women's studies. As an advocate for civil rights and spokesperson for student affairs on my campus, this program really sparked my interest as it revolves around issues that impact people of color and our society in general. I hope that I can learn something new from our discussion, brainstorm new solutions that can allow me to continue to better my community and to be a better leader.
Thanks, Tracy. I am Maisha Carter, and I'm a third year doc student. I have so many hats. I'm sorry. I'm a third year doc student, doctoral candidate actually at IUP in the Administration and Leadership Studies program. I'm serving as an assistant to this project, and for me, representation absolutely matters in every way. The thing that drew me to this project was the mentorship and community that's offered. Those two are very near and dear to my heart. And this project really allows me to bring both of those together in a culturally affirming way. Nedrick?
Hello, everyone. My name is Nedrick Patrick. I'm a PhD candidate in literature and criticism at IUP. The reason I'm interested in this program is because I love minority writings, and minorities are often under fire and over-policed. So now we'll transition to Tracy.
Actually, I'll pass it down to Ms. Veronica real quickly, who will share on the history of the Frederick Douglass Institute. Ms. Veronica?
Yes. Having to learn how to unmute on when I'm controlling the PowerPoint also. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Veronica Watson. I'm a professor of English at IUP, and I am the convener of the Frederick Douglass Institute, which has been in existence in the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education for 22 years. So we've been at it for a while. Of course, we mostly meet face-to-face and do things with students. But during this time of pandemic, like so many other institutions, we've really had to switch to a lot of virtual engagement. And this initiative is one of the things that has arisen from that pivot that we had to take to accommodate and respond to the health issues that were in our society. The mission of the Frederick Douglass Institute Collaborative is to support first generation low income and students of color and making sure that they have access to high impact educational opportunities. And excuse me, as we really have advanced that work over the last 2 decades, this partnership arose very organically because the mentoring program, Pen or Pencil, it's a national mentoring program, and they were also in the process of pivoting as a result of the pandemic. And so we have come alongside to partner to provide some resources for them as they are now offering a lot of mentoring opportunities online. And so the expansion of the Pen or Pencil program is really being supported by the 400 Years of African American History National Commission. So the Frederick Douglass Collaborative has gotten funding and is working with the 400 Year Commission to provide these resources. So that's the reason why the event is being recorded this evening. There will be Pen or Pencil sites all over the country who are able to access this, download it, and then use it as part of their mentoring activities. So we're just so delighted to be working with both of those organizations and recognizing and supporting the work of mentors all around the country, of students who are really looking to understand more about our society and how to be activists for change in that society. So thank you once again for being here and for being part of the events. And I think I'm passing it back to Tracy.
Thank you so much, Ms. Veronica. Before we begin, I would like to just cover some few rules about our discussion, especially with the Zoom etiquette. First, it's important to just to reinstate what Ms. Veronica has said. This session will be recorded for the public viewing. Each facilitator will introduce our guests tonight, that is I, Adriana, and Nedrick, and Maisha, where each panelist will have 5 to 10 minutes to share their thoughts and objectives on the topic. At any time during the discussion, please feel free to use the chat for questions or comments, especially to our audience. If you found something very interesting that our panelists said, or you'd like them to repeat a question or an answer, feel free to use the chat to do so. So we don't lose track of it. Nedrick and Maisha will monitor the chat, and towards the end, Adriana will address them during our Q&A session, which will be about 15 minutes. At this time, Adriana will introduce our first panelist of tonight.
Thank you, Tracy. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Mrs. Emily Powell-Hodges. Emily has been employed as a full-time counselor for Lock Haven University since January 2019. She's originally from Mayberry, North Carolina. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and Sociology from UNC Chapel Hill. And upon graduation, she relocated to Pennsylvania to complete her Master of Education in Clinical Mental Health Counseling at Penn State University. Emily has since gained experience in the field of drug and alcohol counseling, as well as in geriatric counseling and continuing care retirement homes. And at LHU, she specializes in a variety of diagnoses, including trauma, anxiety, and mood disorders. Thank you for joining us tonight, Emily.
I have the pleasure of introducing to you the Director of Program Development and Outreach for the Young People Initiative. Mr. Smith was hired in 1994 as the president of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Kansas City and has also led this organization for nearly 25 years. Also, Dave joined the YIP leadership team in 2018, and he has many local and national awards. Presenting to you, Mr. David Smith.
I have the honor of introducing Mr. J. Paris, who is the director of the Youth Link program, prevention initiatives from the North American Family Institute that aims to build relationship between youth and adults that are in their lives. He has helped launch Youth Link for policing young people. This initiative aimed and helped to break down the communication gridlock that's slowly building across the country. Paris has turned one of the most powerful stories from YouthLink training into a 3-minute documentary video. And Mr. J. Paris also helped co-found the Youth and Police Initiative training in 2003 and has expanded to 32 US cities as well as Bermuda and Belize. Thank you for joining us tonight, Mr. Paris.
And lastly, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming J. Lewis Vega Garena to the panel. J. Lewis went through in person the Youth Police Initiative in 2018 and online in 2020. He's participated in the creation of the online curriculum, and he joins us today also as just a bright young man who has recently graduated from the Youth Police Initiative program after joining at 15. He was born and raised in Milwaukee and has asserted that he didn't really like the police before and definitely didn't trust one of them. But after completing the Youth Police Initiative, he has had many positive connections with officers in his neighborhood that inspired him to join a committee of volunteers to help create an online version of the Youth Police Initiative during COVID. And he's now participated in the first online pilot of the online training program, demonstrating his leadership skills and willingness to connect to others. Jay Lewis is now 16 and is working to graduate from high school and has plans to attend college next. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Jay Lewis. And now I think Emily will get us started.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much for having me. I am going to share my screen, so hold on, I'm gonna pause. I can't use the keyboard and think at the same time. Okay. Okay, are you all able to see the screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, so what I am talking on tonight is bias and stereotypes purely through the psychological lens. And I'm just going to give you some background on it from what's going on kind of in our noggins. So in terms of implicit bias and stereotype, I'll also be touching on power dynamics and the role that they play. And then I'll be talking about a concept called white fragility, which some people may have heard of and other people it may be entirely new to. Okay. All right, so in terms of implicit bias and stereotypes, implicit bias is a term referring to an unconscious association, belief, or attitude towards a social group. So an implicit bias is something that we all experience. It's actually an inherent part of society. What's going on with implicit biases is that our brain on a cognitive level is trying to make very quick connections. So an example that you might see in kind of everyday life would be if you are going to walk through a door or a threshold and there's like a red sign on the door. We'll instinctually pause to look at the sign before we even walk through the door because we associate that red kind of sign with the knowledge of like a stop sign or caution. So in theory, it's great. Our mind is compartmentalizing, we can process faster. What happens in implicit bias is that because we compartmentalize like that, we can end up attaching basic kind of traits or characteristics to entire groups of people. That's where stereotypes come in, and that's where I call it kind of like the next level. So stereotypes is when we attach certain characteristics to an entire social group. So if our mind is making kind of baseline connections, and then we're extrapolating it into an entire group of people, that's where we start to move down the lens of prejudice and racism. Okay, so this term was actually coined by social psychologists in, I believe, 1997. Feel free to correct me if y'all know the exact year. But what they found is that individuals, even without realizing it, tend to make negative or positive connections to an individual solely based on race. And they found this out using a test in which they had people all right, y'all. I'm gonna get a little glitchy on my computer tonight. Y'all have to bear with me. So what they used is a test called the IAT test, and it essentially allowed them to find out that even when there was zero connection between the picture of a person and a word, individuals would subconsciously find a connection and label it as positive or negative. Okay, so that concept, hold that concept of implicit bias. Now we're going to move on to the concept of power dynamics and why it's connected. Power dynamics is a term referring to the distribution of power within a relationship, and we see it constantly. So it's in all relationships. Well, not all relationships, but a wide variety of them. You see it in police officer and civilian. You see it in employer and employee. You see it in student teacher. In my profession, you see it in therapist and client. You see it in parent and child. So we see it in quite a lot. The reason that power dynamics and implicit bias correlate is that power dynamics can take a relationship with two otherwise equal people and give one a differing level of authority over another. So if we have an implicit bias that may be subconscious, we're not even aware of, then what we're doing is we're throwing bias in to a situation of power, and then power has the potential and often does enhance the harm done by that bias. Okay, so one of the most common psychological experiments, and a lot of y'all probably will recognize that, that we see for power dynamics is the Stanford prison experiment. So the Stanford prison experiment, and I'll show you the next slide whenever my computer, has its moment. So the Stanford prison experiment occurred in 1971. And what happened is they actually just put out an ad in the paper. It was the psych department. They put out an ad in the paper and said to a whole bunch of students, hey, we'll pay you money for like a couple weeks. Show up and we're just going to randomly assign you to roles within a prison. You can either be the equivalent of a correctional officer or you could be the equivalent of a prisoner. And we're not going to allow you obviously to do any physical harm to each other or things like that, but we're going to see how the roles play out. The experiment ended very quickly after only a few days, because what they found out is that when individuals were placed in a power role, even though they originally had zero animosity to each other and really had no position of power, found ways to leverage that power against individuals to the point that it genuinely caused harm. That's now an example of why we have ethical review boards in psych. But it was a very, very educational study in terms of things like biases. Okay, so I told you at the beginning, I'm hitting on some big topics, and this is a huge topic I'm gonna kind of touch the surface on, but y'all are welcome to answer or to ask questions about it later. The final piece that I'm bringing in with a concept of bias and power dynamics is the concept of white fragility. So oftentimes, in terms of implicit biases, we are told in order to combat it, you really want to start with educating yourself, which is fantastic. You absolutely do. You want to educate yourself. You want to be aware. You want to check in with yourself constantly to be more aware of those subconscious pulls, which is fantastic, but it also is just the start. The concept of white fragility is specifically refers to race, but you can see it applied to all majority minority situations. White fragility is a term coined by D'Angelo in 2018, and it describes the notion of how white people can become resistant, and I'm sorry, we all are resistant to being labeled racist. And therefore what happens is that we become also resistant to acknowledging moments of personal biases. So because of that, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot, so to speak, and we're not able to learn and grow from those situations. So what happens is that our society really intimately attaches the idea of being racist to being a good or bad person. The downside of that, it makes sense in theory, right? I mean, obviously we don't want to be racist. The downside of that is that it negates, it pretty much cuts out the idea that we all have biases, which we all do have biases, regardless of if you're of a minority group or a majority group or whatever. We all have personal biases. So if we're resistant to the idea of being called racist at all, then what happens is instead of saying, this was a moment where I acted with bias, we say, you're calling me a bad person and I'm not a bad person. And so we reject the knowledge that we could be learning from a situation and instead kind of inground those examples of biases further and further into our routine. Okay, so white fragility is something that all white people experience. And so this is not me saying that there are certain people who do it, not others. It's something that we all do, including myself. All right, y'all, I'll switch to the next slide if I can, but who knows? Okay. There we go. Okay, no, y'all gonna have to bear with me. Y'all lucky I ain't leading the slides all this time. Okay, so it's something that all white people experience. So this is not me saying that certain white people are like have it figured out and other white people don't. By all means. I mean, I'm a counselor, I'm trained in multiculturalism, and I'm saying that I still experience white fragility. So does the author of the book who coined the term. So what she's really saying is that when we react with that, that defensiveness and that anger of being associated with the term of racist, and therefore a bad person, we're blocking our knowledge to be able to change. And we're also putting people of color into a very painful position in which they're continually either being asked to educate, being asked to educate or confront individuals on bias constantly. So in the long and the short, what she says in terms of what we do about this, yes, 100% be aware, but also never assume that you're at the finish line. Throughout this entire process, we are constantly learning and we are constantly working to better ourselves. The moment we assume that we've got it down, we're no longer racist, like we're no longer biased, we've got it under taps, is the moment that we actually work to start incorporating more bias into our routine every day. Okay. All right, I'm gonna stop the share and pass it on to the next panelist.
Who is you, Dr. Smith? I'm not sure if you're muted.
No, thank you
Yep.
very much. How's that? Okay. Thank you, Emily, for that introduction, entree to the subject tonight. You know, the subject of this session certainly is a long-standing concern. And the title, Action versus Reaction, Encountering Stereotypes, Bias, and Policing, which that's exactly what YPI is about. So offsetting and shifting those mindsets. So we appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this important program. We know young people are generally neutral or on a scale of distrust regarding police. From our programming and experience in youth development programming over the years. And, you know, I represent that issue and perspective. It reflects my own personal perception, which extended way into my adult life. That very notion that we're neutral or on a scale of distrust. One of the findings in YPI trainings says that most police are usually rude. And you know, we've seen that shift, but that's the initial mindset. And again, I can attest to that over my lifetime. YPI brings together youth and police to provide training about how to interact with one another and resolve conflicts. I was drawn to YPI based on its being steeped in positive youth development principles, which is my background and activity in my career. So it's also it's also based in police legitimacy theories, which simply stated is it allows the police to exercise authority to maintain social order. So there's certain stances that police and law enforcement take that allow them to perform in that role, so we have to keep that in mind too as we try to make shifts and changes in attitudes. We want to help youth and police avoid negative encounters and change the perception from each other regarding respect, courteousness, communication, positive communication. Again, that's the goal of the program. You know, we've had police respond after going through the program that they felt it was important that they were able to make a connection with kids. They gained new perspectives of kids. They were able to establish relationships with young people. They were able to talk on the same level as young people. The youth changing attitudes and perceptions was one of the positive response that the police offered. Allowing youth to understand police are humans too. I think one of the descriptions of tonight's program indicates that this is a two-way street. You know, people who are not in law enforcement also have biases, as I've tried to describe here and point to. So it really is something that all of us have to work toward, whatever that origin of that belief and perception is. They also enjoyed interacting with teams. It's interesting that the response in the beginning of the training was the question, it's okay to be rude to teenagers when they are rude to you. This was a police belief and perception. And after our training, it changed from a neutral to a disagree. So the police no longer felt that it was okay to be rude to young people. And that's a fundamental step in having a decent conversation and exchange in a situation, in an encounter. And the idea of YPI is to try and saturate a community of youth and police and community with these attitudinal shifts, and to create this groundswell and ripple impact where more people, more young people, more police, more adults in the community, are buying into and believing that. So the most beneficial parts that we hear from police are the deep, respectful conversations about real issues they have with young people, talking about traffic stops. We talk about encounters, traffic stops. And they understand why certain things are done in traffic stops. And then opening up about why they became police. Police were early in the program thinking kids were lying. So what difference does it make how I approach them, because they're going to lie just to get out of it? Well, we've seen that shift from neutral to a disagree in a significant way. Unfortunately, police over aggressiveness toward our young people, particularly young African American males, is going to continue. We see it too often, and unfortunately, until changes in law enforcement tactics are required, and until there is an understanding of bias and stereotype in the community as well. So again, the importance of all sides understanding their roles. YPI is a strong component of the solution that we believe and know results that can be powerful. So we encourage the cities and communities participating in tonight's program, after hearing more about YPI, consider following up with us if you believe YPI would be beneficial to your area. So I'll turn it over to Jay Paris. Jay is the key person behind YPI success as its director for nearly 20 years. Jay?
You'd think after a year I'd learn how to unmute myself quickly, but I'm still catching up. Thank you very much, Dave, and I appreciate it. I'm going to tag team with Jay Lewis, who recently has graduated from YPI and actually helped us build an online version of YPI. Because I think his authentic experiences and voice can bring forward some things that I wouldn't necessarily see from the training perspective as a trainer and a director. But I'd like to get down a little bit and tell you really what it is, what happens in YPI. But just one comment, which is, a stereotype, when you really think of what it is, it's about a widely held belief that's based on assumptions. And what, of course, we'd really like is to have widely held beliefs based on experience and knowledge. So to get from a stereotype, a lot of assumptions with a lot of biases, explicit and implicit built in, across that bridge to an understanding, a trust that's based on knowledge and shared experience is really what YPI is all about. And so I'll just give you a little short overview of how it's structured, and then Jay Lewis can help explain some of the components. So basically, the YPI experience happens over 6 sessions. And what we do is we try to bring together about 15 teenagers. Sometimes they're young teenagers, but sometimes they're older teenagers. It just depends on what the community needs are and what that particular neighborhood wants to achieve. But we try to get those young people together from a common community situation. So it could be a neighborhood, it could be a school, it could be something like a Boys and Girls Club. It could be a detention facility. You know, we worked in all these kinds of situations. We worked with all girls. We worked with all boys. Sometimes we've mixed them together. We offer each young person a $100 stipend to complete the program, but it's something that we ask them to earn by helping us as really like assistant trainers to give police a new perspective on not just who they are, but who teenagers are in their community. And then we also are going to bring in, and I'll explain how that happens in a moment, but we're also going to involve 8 to 10 patrol officers, beat officers who patrol their neighborhood. And the idea is to get them together over these 6 sessions, 3 with only the young people, so they get a chance to really build a community, figure out how they want to share themselves with the officers. And then the last few sessions are with the officers when we'll do some very structured and highly interactive sessions to really break down those stereotypes and really get to know each other and really build something that could be like trust, that actually is a form of trust. So how do you do that? Well, you know, it's something that we've worked at now for almost 17 years, close to 20 years. And the key to it is creating an environment that feels safe to the police, but safe to the young people, in which whatever beliefs each group brought into the room gets challenged. Because, you know, we know almost every kid comes in saying, I don't like the police. Sometimes it's, I don't hate the police. I don't trust the police. And often almost all of the kids are kids of color, and almost all the officers who come in, not all, but large majority of them are white. And they come in with, these kids aren't listening. They're a pain in the butt. You know, we have to deal with them all the time. And, you know, you know, it tries my patience. You know, they're not brought up right. They don't have any good values. They don't have, you know, all the classic stereotypes that you might think about, you know, teenagers having when perceived from the outside by people who are trying to, you know, impose tactics and enforcement. So that starting point, you know, you'd think would be impossible to overcome. But it's just the opposite. And the way we do that is something called cognitive dissonance, you know, and the notion is, you know, you have a cognition or a thought or a feeling or a belief about something, and then you're confronted with an experience that is completely different from that opposes that. And in that moment of trying to reckon, well, this is what I thought, but my experience is something totally different. You go into the state of dissonance or confusion, and it's upsetting, and no one likes to be there. And so one of 2 things is going to happen. You're going to change your opinion, or you're going to dig your heels in deeper. And our training is all about letting cognitive dissonance happen. And for those who dig their heels in deeper, that's okay, because we're going to keep building structured experiences, interactive experiences, scenarios, role plays, one-on-ones to get to know each other in deeper ways, so that sooner or later, you got to either really deny your original experience or be so at odds with what's happening in the room that you really can't maintain it. So in essence, over these 6 days, we cover a lot of ground, and it starts with this very special thing that happens on the 3rd day. And Jay Lewis, can you unmute? Are you there?
Yeah, hello, nice to meet you all again. My name is Jay Lewis. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Jay Lewis, this picture that we have up here right now, that's something that happens on the 3rd day when when the officers are joining for the first time, and the young people have spent 3 days practicing how to tell a structured way of their life stories based on choices they've made, and then they end by sharing a goal. And so the officers are sitting there, they're not sure what to expect. They're a little nervous. The young people have been planning for this moment. Of course, they're a little nervous too. They walk into the room. They don't say much. You know, they're not really, there are no introductions. And one by one, they stand up and they share their stories. And Jay Lewis, do you remember how that went for you? And do you have any observations about what that was like?
Well, in the choice presentations, I was actually like a co-facilitator. I was like, I was doing it was kind of like a listening circle. We did like icebreakers. We each told specific stories that only like 3 minutes long, because we had like sometimes a lot of people, so we had to go by one. Also, meaning for like cops. Cops also told their story, and how it went actually really well. Everyone was like listening. Everyone was listening to my side. Um, the cops were nodding their heads in understanding, and it looks like when we were us young people, when we were talking, they started to realize a couple things, and so it was a very good activity. And then when the cops started telling their own sides of their story, it was young people had the same reaction. So it was a really good experience.
And so those things that they realized, that the police realized, I mean, typically what we see is these young people stand up and they share these 3-minute stories. And at the end of it, we turn to the officers and say, well, what do you think of that? And usually their jaws are on the floor and they're saying, whoa, when I was 15, I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have walked into a room and talked to 8 or 10 cops that I didn't know. I might not even been able to share with any adults. And then, of course, we asked the police officers if they'd be willing to take 5 minutes to think about their story, what happened to them from being teenagers to wearing a uniform, and to tell those stories, to share for 3 or 4 minutes, not not an official story, but really a personal story, something that, would allow us to get to know them better. And would you agree, Jerry Lewis, that the kinds of stories that the police tell are a little surprising? I mean, would you say that the young people were surprised by what they heard?
Yeah, I would say they were surprised.
Yeah. And what was it about them that surprised you the most?
Because there were some police officers that you know how us young people, we saw a lot of things in the news. They show a lot of discrimination, a lot of problems with uh police, for example, um beating up, for example, a colored man. um so different reactions to different types of kids, like colored kids, Hispanic kids like myself. um it's We were kind of surprised on their reactions as well, because they felt like even though they weren't that type of person, we looked at them that way. We looked at all the cops like they were all bad. They all were racist. They all stereotype about us. All they think about us is just that we're good for the streets, and that's it. But it was really interesting to hear their side, how they felt, um, what they thought, what their thought process was, and it made us young people realize a lot of things in that listening circle.
So after that exchange, it's really fascinating. And sometimes we'll ask the young people, was there one officer that you particularly didn't like when you walked in the room and saw them, and why, and how are you feeling now, and why? And so there's a lot of exchange like that. And then we always, when we're in the same room together, we always then have some kind of dinner, pizza or something, pair off, try and find a couple of qualities, star qualities that they recognize in each other, and then they stand up by pairs and share that with the whole group. And then and then exercise by exercise, from icebreakers to role plays to scenarios. It's all about building on the previous exercise to find that common ground, to find where animosity existed and can turn into trust. And it's really remarkable that after even 6 hours together, the amount of common shared experiences that officers have with young people and young people have with officers. I think a lot of young people thought cops were going to come in and they were, they'd all had perfect school grades. They'd never sworn at anybody, they'd obeyed every rule. And they find out that a lot of cops have come from broken homes. A lot of cops have had their own issues getting tossed out of school, or issues with drugs when they were younger, or stolen things even. I mean, we've heard all kinds of stories. And I don't know, Jay Lewis, if that is true for you, if you heard some things that surprised you. Has anything come to mind? I mean, any officers who really particularly surprised you?
There was there was a lot of officers that surprised me. A lot of like social and interacting ones like me. We cracked jokes. Like I said from the beginning, I have never liked police officers due to the experiences of my past with them. But as soon as I got like into those listening circles, it was a very much a shock of the officers that I've met, and which was really good. They were good. They had good sense of humor. They were really funny, and they were like very kind. So
there's this great role play we do where we'll do a scenario, what police typically come up against on the street with young people. And we play it out, and then we talk about it, and then we do reverse roles, and the young people get to be the cops, and the cops get to act like teenagers. And it's pretty wild. I mean, it's, you see a side of police that are really surprising. And I think in some ways the young people find it's pretty hard to be a police officer in a certain way too. So, but that's the beginning. The YPI program is the beginning. We have train the trainer programs we do in different cities, but we're very big on mentorship programs, follow-up programs, very important. We work with the communities to develop those. And as Jay Lewis said, in his community, he became a co-facilitator for follow-up talking circles. And we have many different kinds of activities we do in follow-up. So I know we have limited time here, so I think I'll stop there and turn it over to the team.
Thank you so much for just sharing your personal expertise on these topics tonight. All of you have given us really a lot to consider. So with that, I want to transition to the Q&A right now. So anyone in the audience, feel free to unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you in this discussion. Any questions, just comments you want to share? And there are some questions in the chat that I will get to as well.
While you're, if I may just, while you're waiting for questions, that was a graduation shot of Jay Lewis. And we always conclude with a graduation dinner, which we invite sometimes the police chief, the mayor, we've had governors come. It's really kind of a rite of passage to acknowledge all the good work that not just the young people have done, but the officers as well. And we also have this online version that Jay Lewis was critical in helping us develop. That's been very successful. We've been actually doing that around the country during COVID, and it works surprisingly well too.
So during this time, as you can see, we were laughing. We were playing a kind of like a Family Feud game. It was like it's a little bit of an inside joke, but I'm gonna explain it a little bit. Us kids, we were called the goats. We were just called the goats because, well, we love basketball and we have an inspiration of they're really good players, and the police officers, as the sense of humor, decided to put, okay, I guess we're the pigs. So the if you guys understand that joke, the the only reason why they call themselves pigs is because there are many reasons, because cops have been called pigs before, and there's a lot of stuff around that area. But we were playing a Family Feud, and this is where at the time where Officer CJ said that we're the pigs, and we were just laughing. So it was a really fun experience. Um, of the so for the role playing process, what we did as of that. For example, we played as the police officers, and the police, we picked a specific police officer to play as a teenager. So basically, an event happened. For example, um, a teenager is very angry, and there was a big fight happening, and the police were called. We played. There was two police officers. It was me, and it was the one on the left top corner. We played as the police officer, and the teenager was played as Officer Cynthia. Um, so basically, she was giving us a difficult time. As us teenagers, as I noticed, we like to make things difficult. We have attitudes. We respond in the most rudest or like less manner without information. Um, but she played that role really well. She gave us a hard time, and to understand how police officers feel when they're trying to ask a teenager questions and the response that we give them. So it was a very interesting process that we were happening. We learned a lot, and we learned how police officers feel when they're with a teenager. So
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat specifically for you, Jay Lewis. They said, I'm curious, were there any experiences of participants not believing any of the stories?
that is actually a very good question. Many of the participants, like I said, it's a personal story. So each people have their different opinions on their story. So we we can't really read minds. So I don't know whether if people actually believe the stories or not. But it looked like in the listening circle, everyone believed the story, and everything was going really well. We had very meaningful conversations in the topic. Um, for example, if I say my story, the meaningful conversation that I had with a police officer, we were talking about the situation and who was the officer and how did we feel and how did the officer feel. Like we made it so two sides, we listened to two sides and we made each other understand how we both feel, and we made it to like an access point.
Now, I know that you had a very different, in your past, you kind of didn't really have great interactions with the police. And coming to this program, you know, I bet that it was like a huge mind change. So how does that affect you personally now?
It affects me a bit. It affects me a lot, actually. Right now, I'm like at a 50-50. I believe I believe there's good cops and I believe there's bad cops. It it all depends on the situation. It all depends on how the cops are. Um, but it made me feel really good to learn that there's really good cops out there, and there's actually some that are just trying to help. So
And here's another question for you. It says, this seems similar to forum theater in the role play process. Is there a methodology used in this process or other methodologies used in the interaction?
well, for example, is to make us feel how the two sides. So, like I said, so the police officers made us feel how they interact with like. Sorry, I'm a bit. So, the police officers made us feel. Yeah, that would be a more question for the parents. Yeah.
in terms of methodologies, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of them we use there. We're we use a very structured group process approach. We take a community building approach in that we start out creating norms. What are we all going to agree to as we create this community of people who are going to share this mission of trying to break through the stereotypes that exist between cops and teenagers, and we do a lot of pairings, we do group, we do role plays, and and I would say that it's just highly interactive by nature, and it really is a building process. So where we start is very different from where we end, and that's actually a launching pad for activities that we can do once the training is over.
On that note, Mr. Paris, a lot of, well, obviously, the police department and every police officers are part of a system that hires everyone, obviously. And for a while, studies have shown that there is systematic racism rooted in police departments. And I believe my question is to you: do you believe, the program, the YPI program, can continuously make a long-term change where on individuals that are part of a system that is sometimes coordinated to harm people of color? Do you believe during those sessions and those workshops between young individuals and police officers that sometimes are part of the system for a very long time and sometimes already have their own implicit bias, do you believe during those sessions there can be a long-term effect, a positive long-term effect?
Yes, I want to acknowledge that I do believe that racism does exist in policing today. That said, we have found that when we run about, it seems to happen right around 50 or 60 young people from a neighborhood or a housing development or a school through the program. And we get somewhere between 20 to 30 police officers from a precinct to go through this program. But there's this ripple effect. There's this cultural change that can begin to happen, where the notion of a handful of kids and a handful of cops making connections goes to something much bigger than that. And we've actually had some studies done on that, particularly one of Boston's most violent housing developments called Franklin Field, 3-year study to look at the effects of YPI, doing it several times a year with a good number of the cops from the precinct. Like actually it was something like 80 or 90 police officers went through it, and probably 220 kids, and juvenile crime came way down. I mean, a lot of crime changed, but the other interesting thing was that the call for police help went way up. And that was attributed to the fact that, again, the community began to realize that if they called the police in, they would be treated fairly. It's an uphill battle because I'll tell you, there are two sides to this story of, police brutality. I mean, I've been out riding around with the police, and after 8 or 10 hours on a shift, when you're going from call to call to call, seeing people in their most struggling moments, and you're exhausted and you're hyper vigilant, it can bring out the worst in you. And as an institution that has not given people a chance to ask for help without feeling like they're going to get punished, not creating, places for people to blow off steam or to decompress, and not necessarily emphasizing the kind of training that we do, but instead tactical training. It's an uphill battle, and that's what I think has to change in the police culture itself. And I think there are leaders out there that are willing to do that. but we need more of them.
Thank you so much. I believe we have one of our audience members hand raised. Osman, feel free to hop in.
Hi, and I just want to appreciate Tracy for sending me this invite. She's a dear friend of mine and a wonderful person. We've known each other for quite a while, so I say this with full confidence. So my question is to the general panel. It's revolving around, I guess, the discourse between reform and abolishment, right? Because due to the nature of all these issues that we see centered around police brutality, from racism to the general structure of the system. And please forgive me if this point has been brought up before, but I wonder what the general takes are between the definitions of reform versus abolishment. Because for me, abolishment is more of a deconstruction and then a rebuilding of said practice, of said concept of policing. Because for me, there's a change that needs to be made, right? And whatever that looks like, there needs to be at the center of it a solution. So for some, it's reform, and for others, it's abolishment. So I want to know what the general takes are of that kind of discourse and how we feel in general about reform or abolishment of the police.
Great question. I'm going to leave that open to everyone on the panel.
Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, and as a personal belief, I think that the whole conversation around reform and when it reaches a abolishment point, even more so, from my standpoint, is about assessment, and not to get on a long speech about it, but to determine what's working, what isn't, and hold the appropriate people responsible for making changes identified in that assessment as agreed to by the community. So that's, to me, the appropriate approach versus radicalization of the idea. And I think YPI is a good example of a finding that would occur in an assessment around cops and young people, and how that interaction and relationship spreads on to the broader community. Jay and I both mentioned this ripple effect of having more and more people identify with what YPI is trying to accomplish. We've seen these police officers in these sessions, young kids almost. They've come from not the most desirable situation themselves, and they didn't attain a lot of educational achievement necessarily, or they didn't come from stalwart families, for instance, necessarily. So I mean, they begin to identify that I was there, and so my role in law enforcement needs to reflect an understanding of where I was, and similar to where these kids are. So we believe, and we know that policing has been particularly hard on young African American people of color, males. So we think we're right in that spot where this part of policing can be improved and strengthened through creating communication. And I got to tell you, as a Black man, I have, in my experience later in my life working with law enforcement, it's a whole different relationship. I'm Mr. Smith. Oh, hello, Mr. Smith. I wasn't that, some years ago, and so there is a way to improve it. And I think YPI is right in the middle of a critical area of doing this. These guys are going to be young adults, 19, 20, 24, and they need to have had that kind of revival of thinking as well as law enforcement about who each other is.
So speaking of the program, and Paris, you had mentioned that the program has been very successful. I just want to ask Emily a question. So in the chat, does the YPI program seem to align with the research on how to break down stereotypes and bias, or is it doing something unexpected?
Yeah, I think a wonderful question. It was really interesting hearing Jay explain kind of all of the processes within the program, because as he was speaking, there were moments that I could point out, and I could point out different therapies being used throughout the program, which is really cool to be able to see how psychology and the principles have been integrated into this in a way that I'm imagining a bunch of teenagers are really probably not picking up on during it, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But I mean, I was seeing things like in role playing, you're seeing Gestalt principles being thrown out. When you're talking about cognitive dissonance, you're talking about CBT techniques, which is pretty fantastic. In terms of alignment with the research on breaking down stereotypes, I think they're hitting on some pretty fundamental pieces. When we're looking at cognitive dissonance, we're looking at not simply identifying biases that we might have, but in real time, understanding these biases that come up and then being asked to speak them aloud to these people that we have the biases against, right? And it's going both ways. So it's going from police to youth and youth to police officer. So I think it's certainly laying a pretty fantastic foundation for the continuance of work in combating stereotypes in the future.
So awesome that you guys are able to kind of just like connect your guys' like topics and your expertise. Well, we are out of time for the Q&A, but I just want to thank you, just give thanks to the audience for your participation, and you guys brought up some really thought-provoking questions, and I want to thank the panelists for your contributions that were shared with us tonight. At this moment, I want to pass it on to Tracy. She's going to share a state initiative with us.
Yes, thank you so much, Gianna. I truly appreciated everyone's insight. I thank again the audience members who had small courage of either speaking up or sharing their questions online. Really quickly, I would like to take a moment of sharing some information about this initiative. Since our topic of discussion focused on stereotypes and police treatments of POCs, sharing this initiative with you that was recently put in place by Senator Art Haywood of Philadelphia, who have recently also spoken with us. And he had come up with this initiative in response to insufficient acknowledgement by the PASHI system. Senator Haywood is currently working with students across universities on the campaign that he called Fix the Six Enough. Fix the Six Enough is a focused set of demands that would lead universities to begin to end campus racism. The campaign calls on university leadership to focus on these 6 priorities, where E stands for in racial harassment and speech, nurture and retain students of color for N, O, organize incident reporting systems, U for unveiling mandatory diversity training, G for generating mental health resources, and H, and most likely very impactful, hire faculty and staff of color. The main goal for Fix the Six is for university administration to come up with solutions to these 6 priorities that best fit their campuses. Senator Haywood and student leaders such as myself and Adriana will be meeting with university presidents and system leadership to discuss these concerns. And now, Adriana will take a moment to share some information about our future events. Once again, thank you.
you, Tracy. I just want to thank our panelists again and everyone in the audience for coming out tonight and contributing to this important dialogue. Emily, thank you for sharing your thoughts on implicit bias and power dynamics. And Jay, David, and Jay Lewis, I really admire your program. We can obviously tell it's made a world of difference to the youth. So thank you for your work in that. I know personally for me, I will be taking a lot from this discussion, and I'm sure everyone else will too.